There is something nobody tells you when you are deep in the confusion of loving an avoidant. Nobody tells you that the thing most likely to move them, the thing that reaches past the wall, past the deactivating strategies, past the entire sophisticated architecture of managed distance, is not what you have been trying. It is not the patience, though patience has its place. It is not the pursuit, though the impulse toward it is completely human. It is not the grand demonstration of love, the perfectly worded expression of how you feel, the careful creation of safety that you hoped would make the fear unnecessary. None of those things, however genuinely offered, however exhaustingly sustained, reach the part of the avoidant that is capable of genuine response. What reaches that part is something else entirely, something you may have stumbled toward accidentally in your most exhausted moments, something that felt from the inside like giving up, but was actually, structurally, the one thing capable of producing what all the trying could not. This video is about that thing, what it is, why it works when nothing else does, and why the avoidant, encountering it in someone they genuinely love, experiences something that is, underneath all the complexity and the fear and the defended exterior, something close to relief, something close to joy, the specific, rare, profound joy of finally encountering the condition that makes love feel survivable. Before anything else, something needs to be said about the crying in the title, because it is not hyperbole and it is not manipulation designed to produce false hope. It is an attempt to describe something real that happens in the interior of an avoidant when a very specific change occurs in the person they love. It is not always literal tears. It does not always manifest visibly. The avoidance system is too practiced at containment for the full experience to necessarily reach the surface in an obvious form. But something occurs, something that has the quality of release, of a tension that has been held for a long time, encountering something that finally unexpectedly makes the holding unnecessary. That release, that interior loosening of something that has been permanently tensed, is what the joy describes. Not the euphoric joy of everything being resolved, the quieter, more foundational joy of safety, of something the avoidant has been unconsciously searching for in every relationship they have ever entered and never quite found. The specific, structural, deeply personal safety of being in the presence of someone who has become genuinely okay without them. That is what produces the release. Not your love, your okayness, your genuine, demonstrable, internally grounded okayness without them. The fact that you changed this, the orientation, the need, the suspended quality of someone whose life was partially organized around the hope of their eventual full presence, that change is the thing that reaches the avoidant at a depth that nothing else has managed to reach. To understand why this specific change produces this specific response, you have to go back to the root of the avoidance fear, not the surface fear, the stated discomfort with intensity, the claimed need for space, the articulated preference for independence. The root fear, the one that was installed before language, before the ability to name or examine or choose a response to it. The root fear is this, that love is a trap, that closeness is the precursor to consumption, that letting someone matter, really matter, at the full depth of what genuine attachment means, is the beginning of a process that ends in the loss of self, in being needed in a way that cannot be met, in being responsible for someone else's emotional survival, in becoming, through the act of loving and being loved, the load-bearing wall of another person's entire interior architecture. That fear was not born from nothing. It was born from experience. From the specific formative experiences of a child whose caregivers were either emotionally unavailable, teaching the child that needing people leads to disappointment, or emotionally enmeshed, teaching the child that closeness means being responsible for another person's feeling. In either case, the lesson was the same. Love costs you yourself. Connection requires the sacrifice of autonomy. Letting someone in means eventually being crushed by the weight of their need. That lesson became the operating system, and every relationship the avoidant has entered since has been evaluated at the level of the nervous system through the lens of that lesson. Does this person need me in a way that will consume me? Will this closeness cost me myself? Is this love a trap? And here is what you're pursuing, your patience, your sustained and generous availability was communicating to that operating system, however unintentionally, however lovingly. It was communicating through every reach, every accommodation, every demonstration of how much you needed the connection to become what it had the potential to be, that the fear was correct, that you did need them in a way that would consume, that the closeness would cost them their autonomy, That the love was, structurally, the thing the operating system had always identified it as. Not because you were too much, not because your needs were excessive, but because the operating system was reading the need, any need, expressed with any degree of genuine investment, as confirmation of its oldest, most deeply embedded prediction about what love produces. Every loving, hopeful, genuinely well-intentioned thing you did in service of getting closer was, from the perspective of the avoidance nervous system, evidence for the prosecution, evidence that the fear was right, that this was going to become what love always becomes, the trap, the consumption, the weight that eventually requires everything. And then you changed. You did not change because you stopped loving them. You changed because something in you, through the grief, through the clarity, through the exhausting, necessary, ultimately transformative process of arriving at your own ground, something in you stopped organizing itself around their availability. Stopped needing the connection to resolve in a particular way in order to be okay. Stopped holding its breath, waiting for them to become what the hope needed them to become. You became okay. Not perfectly okay. Not without grief or longing or the genuine wish that things were different, but fundamentally, structurally okay, the kind of okay that does not depend on their behavior for its maintenance, the kind that has its own foundation, its own ground, its own source of sustenance that exists independently of whether they are present or absent, warm or cool, moving toward you or maintaining the managed distance. That okayness, arriving in someone the avoidant genuinely loves, lands in their nervous system as something it has never encountered from this source before. And what it lands as is the absence of the trap. The specific, profound, almost disorienting absence of the thing the operating system has been bracing against since the beginning. The need that was supposed to be there is not there anymore. Not because the love is gone, the love is present, perhaps more genuinely and completely present than it has ever been, precisely because it is no longer distorted by the anxiety of hoping, but the consuming need, the weight that was supposed to eventually become unbearable, the confirmation of the oldest fear. It is not there, and its absence changes everything in the avoidance interior. Something relaxes. At the level of the nervous system, something that has been permanently activated, the low-grade continuous background alarm of someone who is always half-braced for the confirmation that love is a trap. Something in that alarm quiets. Not completely, not permanently. The operating system does not rewrite itself in a single moment, but something shifts. Something that was always tensed encounters, perhaps for the first time in the context of a genuine romantic attachment, the absence of the stimulus it was tensed against. And in the quiet of that absence, something else becomes audible. Something that the alarm was always drowning out. The feeling. The actual, unmanaged, full-sized feeling for you that was present throughout and was being continuously managed by the system that was also continuously managing the fear. That feeling, in the quieter space that your okayness creates, becomes more accessible, more present, more difficult to keep at the managed distance that was always maintained when your need was providing the alarm system with its activation material. This is the mechanism of the joy, not the joy of getting something they wanted. The joy of the fear not arriving when it was expected to, of the trap not closing, of the love being present and the consumption not following, of closeness being survivable in a way the operating system had never been able to confirm before. It is the joy of someone who has been braced for an impact that does not come, the specific, releasing, almost incredulous relief of that non-arrival. Now here is what needs to be said clearly, because the framing of this video's title could be misread in a way that would be actively harmful. The change you made, the arrival at genuine okayness, the building of your own ground, the release of the suspended hoping, that change was not made for them. It was not made in service of producing joy in the avoidant, or engineering a particular response or finally finding the key that unlocks their availability. It was made because it was necessary for your own survival, your own healing, your own life. And the fact that it produces something in them, the fact that the change that was necessary for you also happens to be the change that reaches the part of them capable of genuine response, that is not a strategy confirmed. It is a convergence. The thing that is genuinely good for you is also the thing that is genuinely good for the possibility of real connection. Those two things align not because the universe is arranging a romantic outcome, but because genuine health in one person creates the conditions for genuine connection with another. Because the absence of the consuming need removes the confirmation of the fear. Because your wholeness makes the closeness survivable in a way you're hoping never could. That convergence is worth sitting with, because it contains a truth that extends beyond this relationship and beyond the avoidant dynamic specifically. The truth that the version of you most capable of genuine connection is not the version that is most fully organized around the hope of the connection. It is the version that is most fully organized around itself, its own life, its own ground, its own genuine, independently sourced okayness. That version is not less loving. It is more genuinely loving, because love that comes from wholeness, from a full, grounded, genuinely okay person who is choosing the connection rather than needing it, is a fundamentally different experience for the recipient than love that comes from the anxious, suspended, hoping place. One lands as gift. The other, however genuinely offered, lands as weight, as the beginning of the obligation the avoidance system has always been bracing against. You change from weight to gift, not by becoming less, by becoming more. More fully yourself, more completely present in your own life, more genuinely okay in a way that the love is now an expression of rather than a plea for. That change is the one that produces the quiet, internal, possibly tearful recognition in the avoidant that something they believed was impossible has arrived. Not the perfect partner. Not the relationship without difficulty or fear, or the ongoing work of two imperfect people building something together. But the specific foundational thing their nervous system was always searching for and never expected to find. Love that does not cost them themselves. And in the presence of that love, finally, after everything, something in them stops bracing. The stopping of the bracing is not a small thing for someone whose nervous system has been in a state of low-grade, continuous, background activation throughout every significant relationship they have ever entered, for someone whose entire relational history has been organized around the anticipation of the moment when closeness becomes consumption. The stopping of the bracing is the equivalent of putting down a weight they had forgotten they were carrying. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It arrives as a quality of stillness that is unfamiliar enough to be initially disorienting. A quiet where the alarm used to be. A space where the bracing used to occupy. And in that space, something becomes possible that was not possible before. Not immediately, not without the ongoing effortful work of a nervous system learning to trust a new kind of input, but possible in the structural sense. Available in a way it was not available when the fear was providing the continuous activation material that kept the defense system deployed. What becomes possible is presence. Genuine, unmanaged, not calculating the exit presence. The experience of being in the connection without the simultaneous management of the connection, of letting the moment be what it is without the background process of assessing how threatening it is and at what level the deactivation needs to engage. The avoidant, encountering your genuine okayness, finds that the moment does not require the same level of management it always required before. Because the stimulus for the management, the need that was always present, always pressing, always providing the nervous system with its activation cue, is no longer arriving in the same form. This is where something genuinely new becomes structurally available in the dynamic. Not guaranteed, not automatic, not produced by your change alone, because the avoidant's own work is still required and their own choices still determine the outcome. But available, the door that was always being managed from their side, kept at the precise distance that allowed warmth without full entry, that door has a different quality now. The pressure that was always on the other side of it, the pressure that made keeping it carefully managed feel necessary, that pressure has changed. Your okayness changed the pressure. Not by removing the love. The love is present and real, and perhaps more palpable now that it is not distorted by the anxiety that used to accompany it, but by changing the nature of what the love is asking. Love from the grounded, genuinely okay version of you is not asking to be completed, is not asking to be made safe, is not asking the avoidant to become the load-bearing wall of your interior. It is simply present, offering itself without the implicit demand that it be received in a particular way, or returned in a particular form, or used to resolve a particular internal deficit. That quality of love, offered without demand, present without pressure, genuine without need, is what the avoidance system has no existing defense against. Because the defenses were built for the other kind. The kind that arrives with the weight of someone else's hope attached to it. The kind that, however lovingly offered, carries the implicit message that the avoidance response is required for the other person's fundamental okayness. The defenses were built for that. They are extraordinarily well suited for that. They have been successfully managing that for decades. They were not built for this. For love that does not need anything back in order to remain intact. for presence that does not require reciprocation to sustain itself, for the specific, unusual, genuinely rare quality of someone who is in the connection completely and also completely fine outside of it. The defense system reaches for its tools and finds them unnecessary. And in the finding them unnecessary, something that has always been on guard relaxes into something it has not been able to be in a very long time. Simply here. What does the avoidant do with that relaxation? This is the question that matters most, practically, and it deserves the honest, unromantic answer rather than the version shaped by what would be most satisfying to hear. The honest answer is that the relaxation does not automatically produce the fully available, consistently present, wall is completely down version of the avoidant that the hope has always been reaching for. The relaxation is an internal shift, not a completed transformation. The nervous system's lowered alarm is the beginning of new possibility, not the arrival of the fully healed person. What the relaxation produces, in most cases, is a quality of different behavior that is subtle enough to be missed if you are not paying attention and significant enough to be meaningful if you are. A slightly different quality of presence in the ordinary moments. A slightly reduced frequency of the deactivating strategies, a slightly increased willingness to stay in the moment of connection rather than beginning the management process before the connection can deepen past the comfortable threshold. Small things, incremental things, things that are only visible against the background of the history of the dynamic, where the contrast makes them legible. These small things matter, not as evidence that the change is complete, as evidence that the change has begun. That the internal shift that your okayness produced is finding its way slowly and in the avoidant's own time and in the avoidant's own way towards something externally expressed, toward behavior that is slightly more available, slightly more genuinely present, slightly less organized around the continuous management of the distance. But here, and this is critical, here is where your own clarity is most necessary, because the natural response to seeing those small changes is to move toward them, to respond to the slightly increased presence with increased availability of your own, to let the warmth of the changed quality pull you back into the orientation that your okayness replaced, to interpret the small changes as the arrival of the thing the patient was always waiting for, and to respond by returning to the posture of the patient, hoping, organized around them version of yourself. That response would be the undoing of the very thing that produced the change. Because the change, the relaxation, the lowered alarm, the slightly different quality of presence, was produced by your genuine okayness, by the real, structural, independently grounded quality of someone who is not organized around the connection for their fundamental well-being. The moment that okayness becomes contingent again, the moment the small changes produce a return to hope-organized orientation, the stimulus for the defense system returns, the pressure resumes, the need is present again, and the nervous system, however recently relaxed, has decades of practiced responses to that particular stimulus. The small changes deserve to be received, warmly, genuinely, without the withholding that would be its own form of game playing, but received from the ground, from the okayness. Not from the hope that the small changes mean the full change has arrived, from the grounded, discerning, genuinely present place of someone who notices what is different and holds it accurately, neither dismissing it nor inflating it into more than the evidence currently supports. This is the most sophisticated relational skill available, and it is the one that the entire arc of this conversation has been building toward. The ability to be fully present in a connection, genuinely warm, genuinely open, genuinely there, while simultaneously maintaining the internal ground that makes the presence a gift rather than a need. The ability to feel the love and express the love and receive whatever the other person is capable of offering, without that receiving being organized around the hope that it will resolve into something specific, without the reception becoming the return of the suspended waiting. It sounds paradoxical, being fully present while being genuinely okay without the presence, caring completely while being fundamentally fine if the caring is not returned in the form the hope would specify, loving without needing, being in it completely without being organized around it primarily. It is not paradoxical. It is the description of mature love, love that has been through enough, through the hope and the confusion and the grief and the clarity and the genuine internal work of building independent ground, to exist without the distortions that characterized its earlier, less developed form. Love that is large enough to hold both the genuine feeling and the genuine freedom simultaneously. That does not require the resolution of the uncertainty to remain intact, that can be present in the not yet knowing without the not yet knowing becoming the organizing anxiety of your interior. The avoidant encountering that love for the first time, really encountering it, feeling its quality, registering the specific absence of the pressure that used to accompany it, is encountering something that their operating system has no prior experience of in the context of genuine romantic attachment. They have experienced non-threatening love before, the love of people who were not particularly invested, the love that was easy to receive because it cost nothing to lose, love that did not matter enough to trigger the alarm system in the first place. That is not what this is. This is love that matters, genuinely, specifically, deeply matters. The attachment is real, and the avoidant feels it, and the nervous system is fully aware of what is at stake in the connection. This is not safe because it is inconsequential. It is safe because the person offering it has built something in themselves that makes the offering genuinely free. That makes the love something that can be received without the obligation of completion. That makes the closeness survivable because the person offering the closeness does not need the avoidant to be different from who they are in order to remain okay. That specific combination, love that matters and love that is free, is the rarest thing the avoidance relational world has ever contained. And the rarity of it, felt in the nervous system of someone whose entire history has confirmed that love which matters always comes with the weight of the other person's need, produces the response that the title describes. Not always in tears, not always visibly, but in the interior, in the quiet where the alarm used to be, in the stillness where the bracing used to live, something responds to the rarity of this with what can only be described as recognition. The recognition of something that was always needed and never expected to arrive. Something that makes the oldest fear, that love is a trap, that closeness costs the self, that letting someone in leads to being consumed. Something that makes that fear, for the first time, feel like it might not be the final word. That is what you changed. Not the love. The love was always there, always real, always larger than what the dynamic allowed it to express. But the quality of it, the weight of it, the way it arrives. You changed from someone whose love was asking to be completed to someone whose love is genuinely whole. From someone whose okayness depended on the connection resolving in a particular way to someone whose okayness exists independently of any particular resolution. That change required everything this conversation has examined. The grief fully felt, the pattern honestly seen. The self-work genuinely done, the ground actually built rather than performed. The independent life genuinely inhabited rather than strategically constructed as a waiting posture. It required the full, costly, unglamorous, entirely necessary arc of becoming someone who is primarily oriented toward their own life, who loves from fullness rather than from lack, who chooses the connection rather than needing it, who can be in the most uncertain, most unresolved, most still becoming quality of a genuine relationship without that uncertainty organizing the entire interior around the question of when it will resolve. And the avoidant, feeling that change, feeling the specific quality of someone who has done that work, who carries that ground, who offers that particular form of genuinely free love, the avoidant feels something shift in the oldest part of the operating system. Not the rewrite, not the complete dissolution of the fear that was installed before language, but the first genuine evidence, received at the level of the nervous system rather than the level of the considered thought, that the fear's prediction might be wrong. That love which matters does not always become the trap. That closeness does not always cost the self. That someone can let you in and not need you to be their entire floor. The evidence is you, the changed, grounded, genuinely okay version of you, present and free simultaneously, loving and whole simultaneously, in it completely and fine outside it simultaneously. That evidence does not immediately rewrite the operating system, but it introduces a new data point that the system has never had before, a data point that the system will return to. In the unguarded moments, in the quiet where the alarm used to be, in the stillness where the bracing used to live. A data point that says, for the first time, in the specific, credible, felt-in-the-body way that only genuine evidence provides, that this might be different, that this person might be safe to love fully, that the wall, here, might not be necessary, that what they feared most about letting someone in completely, the consumption, the loss of self, the trap, might not be what arrives if they do. What might arrive instead is this: you, whole, grounded, free, loving them without needing them to be anything other than what they are. And somehow, in the presence of that specific, rare, hard-won love, the oldest fear goes quiet. And in the quiet, something that has been waiting a very long time, finally, carefully, with all the tentativeness of something that has been hurt before and is choosing, despite that, to try, begins to open. There is a particular kind of hope that is different from the hope that has been examined and questioned and carefully dismantled throughout this conversation. The hope that was questioned, the suspended, organized around their timeline, indefinitely deferring your own life hope, that hope was problematic not because hoping is wrong, but because of what it was doing to you, because of the posture it required, because of the way it was functioning as the continuation of a dynamic, rather than the genuine orientation toward a possible future. The hope that is different is the kind that exists alongside full presence in your own life rather than instead of it. That does not require the suspension of your own becoming in order to be maintained. That can hold the genuine possibility of something without organizing your entire interior around the question of whether that possibility will materialize. That is, in the most accurate sense, not really hope in the anxious form at all. It is openness, the specific, grounded, genuinely free openness of someone who has done the work and built the ground and arrived at the okayness and is now simply available, not waiting. Available, that distinction between waiting and available, is the one that changes everything about what the next chapter of this looks like. Available means something specific. It means the door is open, but you are not standing at it. You are in the middle of your own life, fully, genuinely, with real absorption in the actual texture of your actual days. And the door is open behind you, not propped open with deliberate effort, not maintained open through the continuous monitoring of whether it is still open enough. Just open. The natural unforced openness of someone who has not closed themselves and has not organized themselves around the opening either, who is simply living and living completely, and the availability is a feature of who they are rather than a posture they are maintaining. The avoidant encountering that availability, the door open and you genuinely in the middle of your life rather than standing at the door, encounters something that the defense system has no efficient response to. Because the defense system was built for the door with pressure behind it, the pressure of someone standing there, waiting, hoping, organizing themselves around whether and when the door would be more fully opened. That pressure activated the management system, required the management of the distance, necessitated the strategies. The door open, and you genuinely elsewhere, in your own life, building your own things, absorbed in your own becoming, that produces a completely different quality of invitation. Not an invitation to be managed, an invitation to choose. Genuinely choose. Not to choose in response to pressure or anxiety or the management system's assessment of how much this is going to cost. To choose from the rare, quiet, genuinely available space of someone who finally, in the absence of the pressure, has access to their own wanting without the fear of what the wanting requires. The choosing from that space is the only kind of choosing that means anything. This is the deepest truth in this entire conversation, and it needs to be said clearly. The avoidant choosing closeness in response to pressure, choosing because the fear of losing you finally outweighed the fear of having you, that is not the choosing that produces genuine change. It is the management system running a different calculation. A calculation that says the cost of absence has exceeded the cost of presence, and therefore presence is now the more efficient strategy. That calculation is real. It produces real behavior, but it does not produce the internal shift that changes the operating system. It produces the return without the transformation, the re-entry without the new capacity. The relationship resuming its previous shape with slightly higher motivation on the avoidance part. Motivation that will sustain itself until the intimacy rebuilds and the alarm system reactivates, and the management strategies redeploy. The avoidant choosing closeness from the quiet space that your genuine okayness created, choosing not because the pressure finally exceeded their tolerance, but because the absence of pressure finally made the wanting accessible. That is different. That choosing comes from a different place. From the part of them that has always wanted this but could never access the wanting cleanly because the fear was always providing so much activation material that the wanting was drowned out. In the quiet of the fear not arriving, in the specific rare hard-won quiet of your okayness, removing the confirmation of the oldest prediction, the wanting becomes audible, perhaps for the first time in the context of a genuine attachment. The wanting to be close, the wanting to be known, the wanting to let someone in completely, without the management, without the exit strategy, without the continuous calculation of how much this is going to cost, that wanting, audible for the first time, is the beginning of the only genuine change available. What supports that beginning, not what forces it, not what engineers it. What genuinely supports the fragile, tentative, first-time audible quality of an avoidance wanting finally reaching the surface without being immediately managed back down. Consistency. Not the consistency of someone who is performing stability in order to produce a response. The consistency that is simply the natural expression of a person who has built genuine ground. Who is reliably themselves. Warm when warmth is natural, honest when honesty is necessary, present in the ordinary moments without the amplification of effort that used to characterize the presence when the hope was loudest. The consistency that does not spike when they move closer and does not collapse when they create distance. That is simply, steadily, genuinely there, not as a strategy, as a feature of who you have become. That consistency, received by the avoidance nervous system over time, in ordinary moments, without the distortion of pressure or the amplification of hope, is the input that the operating system needs to begin genuinely updating, not a single dramatic moment of proof. The accumulation of unremarkable, undramatic, consistent evidence that the prediction was wrong, that the presence does not escalate into consumption, that the love does not become the trap, that the person who is here today is the same person who was here last Tuesday and will be here next month, not because they are suppressing their needs in deference to the avoidance comfort, but because their own ground is stable enough that they do not need any particular thing from the interaction in order to remain intact. That input, accumulated across enough ordinary moments, does something to the operating system that nothing else can do. It creates a new pattern in the neural architecture, a new prediction. Not the complete replacement of the old one. The old one was installed too early and too deeply to be simply overwritten by new experience, but alongside it, a competing prediction. One that says, in the specific bodily felt sense way that neural predictions operate, this one is different. This has been different for long enough and in enough unremarkable moments that the difference is structural rather than situational. That the evidence is sufficient to support a tentative, carefully held, but genuine revision of the oldest expectation. Love does not always become the trap. This love has not become the trap. This person's presence has not escalated into consumption. Their okayness has been genuine across enough ordinary Tuesdays that the consistency is no longer performing. It is simply true. That revision, however tentative, however carefully held, however accompanied by the residual activation of an operating system that does not update quickly or completely, that revision is the internal change that external behavior eventually reflects. Not immediately. Not without the ongoing, daily, unglamorous work of an avoidant choosing, moment by moment, to stay present when the alarm fires, rather than reaching immediately for the management strategy. But genuinely. In the incremental, barely perceptible, eventually unmistakable way that real change always moves, your role in supporting that change is smaller than you might expect, and more important than you might realize. It is smaller in the sense that you cannot do the avoidance work. You cannot speed the updating of the operating system. You cannot force the new prediction to form faster, or the old fear to quiet sooner. You cannot manufacture the internal shift through the quality of your presence, however extraordinary. The updating happens at the speed of genuine neural learning, which is slower than hope would prefer and faster than despair would suggest. It is more important in the sense that the consistency of your genuine okayness is the input the learning requires. Without it, without the sustained, undramatic, unremarkable evidence of someone who is genuinely present and genuinely fine, and genuinely not asking to be completed, the operating system has nothing new to learn from. It returns to its default prediction. The fear reasserts. The management strategies redeploy. The new pattern fails to form because the input that would form it is no longer consistently present. Your genuine okayness, maintained not as a performance, but as the natural expression of someone who has actually done the internal work, is the most important contribution you can make to the possibility of genuine change. Not the most dramatic, the most structural. The one that operates below the level of anything visible or memorable. The one that the avoidance nervous system is learning from in the ordinary moments when neither of you is paying particular attention to the learning. This is where the conversation has been going from the beginning, not to a technique or a strategy or a carefully calibrated approach designed to produce a specific response. To this, the genuine, internally grounded, independently sustained okayness that changes the quality of everything you bring to every interaction. That makes the love you offer something the avoidance system has no existing defense against. That creates the specific conditions under which the oldest fear can, for the first time, encounter sufficient contradicting evidence to begin the tentative, fragile, genuine process of revision. The crying with joy in the title, the interior release, the stopping of the bracing, the quiet where the alarm used to be, that is what you produced, not through effort, through becoming, through the full, costly, unglamorous, deeply necessary arc of arriving at yourself. At your own ground, at your own genuine, independently sourced okayness that does not depend on any particular outcome with any particular person in order to remain intact. That becoming is the whole thing. It is not the means to an end. It is the end itself. The avoidance potential change is a possible additional outcome of it. A genuine possibility, one worth holding with the open, non-anxious, genuinely free quality of someone who can imagine a beautiful future without organizing their present around the requirement that it arrive. But the becoming, yours alone, yours in the specific and irreplaceable way that only genuine internal work produces. That was always the point. Before the avoidant, after them, independent of what they choose with the quiet you created in them. The point was always you, arriving at yourself fully enough to love from that fullness, rather than from the lack that preceded it. You arrived. Maybe not completely, maybe still in process, as all genuine becoming always is, but genuinely, structurally, irreversibly further along than you were at the beginning of this. And from here, from this ground, with this okayness, offering the specific quality of love that costs the recipient nothing and asks nothing back that they are not genuinely able to give, everything is different, not because the avoidant changed. Because you did, and your change, quiet, complete, built from the hardest materials available, is the one that lasts, regardless of what it produces in them, regardless of what comes next. Yours, completely, finally, yours.